In a small town nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, there was a dense forest that the locals avoided at all costs, especially after dark. The forest was thick with ancient trees, their branches twisting together to form a nearly impenetrable canopy. The undergrowth was a tangle of thorny bushes and roots that seemed to reach out to trip anyone who dared to venture off the narrow paths. But the true reason the forest was avoided was because of the stories. Stories of something or someone watching from the shadows. The story I'm about to tell happened not too long ago to a woman named Claire. Claire had moved to the town with her husband Mark to escape the bustle of city life. They had purchased a charming old house on the edge of the town, with a large yard that backed directly into the notorious forest. Despite the warnings from the townsfolk, Claire found the woods beautiful and peaceful during the day, and she often took long walks on the trails. One evening, as the sun began to set and the shadows grew long, Claire decided to take a short walk before dinner. She had walked the trail behind her house dozens of times and felt no fear. The woods were still and quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves or distant call of an owl. As she walked, she noticed a chill in the air that hadn't been there earlier. The hair on the back of her neck began to stand on end, but she brushed it off as a sudden change in the weather. Then she heard a soft crunching of leaves behind her, almost as if someone was walking a few paces back. She stopped and turned around, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. Claire shook her head, convinced it was her imagination, and continued walking. But the sound came again, closer this time. She quickened her pace, her heart beginning to race. Suddenly, the woods around her seemed to darken unnaturally, as if the night had fallen in an instant. The crunching footsteps were now unmistakably close, but every time she turned, there was no one there. Panic set in and Claire broke into a run, the path beneath her feet seeming to stretch on endlessly. The sound of footsteps quickened behind her, keeping pace no matter how fast she ran. Just as Claire was about to scream, she burst out of the woods and into her backyard, gasping for breath. The air was warm again and the sun was still setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. She turned to look back at the woods, but they appeared normal, serene even, no sign of whatever had been following her. Claire told Mark about her experience, but he was skeptical. He suggested it was just an overactive imagination, perhaps fueled by the eerie stories she had heard. But Claire knew what she had felt, what she had heard. She resolved never to walk in the woods at dusk again. A few nights later, as she lay in bed trying to sleep, she heard it again. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, but this time they were coming from outside her window. The house was on the second floor, and their bedroom faced the woods. Claire's heart pounded as she listened intently. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they stopped directly beneath her window. Gathering her courage, Claire peeked through the curtains. Her breath caught in her throat. Standing just beyond the tree line was a shadowy figure, tall and thin, its face obscured by the darkness. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching. Claire stumbled back from the window, her pulse racing. When she looked again, the figure was gone. But from that night on, Claire felt the presence whenever she was alone in the house. She would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of her eye, hear faint whispers when no one else was around, and always the footsteps in the night. Eventually, unable to bear the constant fear, Claire and Mark sold the house and moved away. But the townspeople say the figure still lingers in the woods, watching, waiting for someone else to walk too far into the trees after dark. And those who do rarely return the same, or at all.